Welcome to Thinking Without Borders, and again we salute our viewers and we tell them, you know, we appreciate the time that we're going to be spending with them, and we certainly hope that they too will appreciate the time they're going to be spending with us. You know, we have a guest, and we're going to be speaking with Mark Torres, but before we do, I wanted to just have a little bit of a commentary on the elections, the winners and the losers. Quite often, and I phrased it specifically for that reason, winners and losers. And as we move forward, you will understand why we put it in that context. But what's important, let's look at the winners. I mean, it's quite clear. President Obama is one of those winners. But the key players, the people that control the game, you know, it's tantamount to, you know, if you're going to a casino, the house always wins. So the big winners are the bankers. The big winners are the pharmaceuticals. The big winners are the oil companies. The big winners are the agribusiness, because there's been an attack in this country on small farmers. And the big winners are Monsanto. So which means we're going to be GMO'd as much as possible. And I think that's a very important perspective. Now there are, and for some reason, there are certain things that maybe I didn't see in terms of, I think women in this particular election also won. And I think it's important to notice that, to mention that. Now, it doesn't mean that every sector of the population will benefit the same way. But what's important is that when you have representatives in a country talking about legitimate rape, I think it's not only appalling to women, it should be appalling to us all. And I think what we are seeing is this kind of mindset received a tremendous pushback from women. Even though I would have thought that 55% for President Obama would have been a little bit more, but still women senators for the first time. And we also saw another winner again, another grouping or demographic, I think, that's very important that has won, are the gays. Not only did President Obama he accepted or gave through his support behind gay marriages. And what we saw was very first time an elected official who declared herself to be such, to be gay, and won in Wisconsin. So what we're seeing is, so I think those are very important points and those are very important steps, but it's not sufficient. And I think the biggest losers in this situation will be the ones that have celebrated the most, and it will be the blacks, primarily African-American males. They are the biggest losers, and they have been a constant loser in these battles. And a very simple reason, because as Michelle Alexander has mentioned, which is the new Jim Crow, which is the usage of drug to attack a population, to imprison a population, of course, to criminalize this population, and this has remained a constant. The losers, of course, as we know, we're not going to go into the loser in terms of Mitt Romney, because Mitt Romney, just like Barack Obama, is a vehicle. It's a vehicle for ideas. It's much more, they are symbolisms. But yet within those symbolisms, there are very important elements that are moved through them. And if you look specifically with the Christian right, that has a tendency to look at homosexuality as demons, and that's their perspective, and we don't have to respect it, but I'm going to tell you much more importantly, they look at wars as a normal process of capitalist enterprise. And I think this particular diagram, this particular duality, not only goes for the Christian right, it goes for almost everyone that calls themselves Christians. They are quick and trigger to respond to sexuality, but they are not quick to respond to bombing of children that look just like us. And that's a fundamental problem in a society that creates these kinds of mindset, these kinds of games in which other people's lives are not a concern, only American lives. And that, to me, is a fundamental problem in a society that is collectively sick. So in essence, when I listen to the debate between Glenn Ford and Dr. I think it's Bryson, and he qualified this, and this is where we talk about winners and losers. He qualified this as a match. As he posed the question to Glenn Ford, he said to Glenn, Glenn, this is like Miami Heat having a match with, let's take any other team, Oklahoma or whatever, and they're having a championship, and then you're telling me you want to see Los Angeles win. And I think Glenn responded very well, but that kind of a mindset gives you a very good idea of the pigeonhole, sort of the ostrich that puts its head on the hole and says, this is my team, irrespective. This is my team on the right, irrespective. It doesn't work. And fundamentally, what Dr. Bryson was really pushing is that we're spectators. We're spectators in a sport. The sport that he thinks has nothing to do with life, because we all have a responsibility to make adult decisions, mature decisions, sophisticated decisions, because we are too much emotional and very much on the surface. So fundamentally, we need to rethink. We need to revisit questions, and we cannot, and I will say this categorically, there was no one progressive that voted for Barack Obama. Not one progressive. We had cheerleaders that voted for Barack Obama. And we're going to be discussing an issue that we had discussed 2 weeks ago, dealing with Chavez, but we will expand on a number of issues and also discuss the American political system with Mark, but primarily we will focus on Chavez. So we're gonna move in. Let's welcome Mark Torres. And Mark, welcome to Thinking Without Borders.
Thank you.
Good
Gracias.
to have you here.
Good to be here.
Good. Now, Mark, I'm gonna give a little about some of the things that you've done. And Mark is again a father and married and has 3 children. Also has a bachelor's degree in liberal arts, but has continued on to get a master's degree in secondary education. And Mark teaches at this point, is that correct?
Right.
You teach
in the
in
Bronx.
You teach in
Middle school.
Middle school.
Yeah.
Mark is also a current, he's the co-founder of the shirt that you see here, and we would suggest our good buddy Luis to focus on the shirt, which is the People's Power Movement.
Yeah.
And in Spanish, it's
Movimiento Poder Popular.
Tremendous, tremendous. So one thing that we wanted to do is to revisit the issue, because we had a first opinion that was given by Mariana Martin, a young woman who felt very strongly about Capriles. Mm-hmm. And we discussed the issue, and we broadened the issue as much as we could with her to not look at simply the Capriles, but looking fundamentally, mm-hmm. again, the orientation, what is the pursuit mm-hmm. of the goal that Chavez has sort of put out there, mm-hmm. and is it something that can be realized? So we're going to discuss that. We're going to take a look at, you tell me what your take is before we even, and by the way, the person's name that I probably was butchering was Michael Eric Dyson. So that was his name. So it's a very good debate for you to go and take a look at. So give us an idea of what you felt before we get into some questions and answers, if you want.
Well, I think that when you look at the Venezuelan election, this fellow by the name of Capriles was pretty much the Mitt Romney of Venezuela. You have somebody who will change their tune or will change what they say based on what he thinks is going to get him elected. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is where people are coming from and what positions they've been holding on to, certainly just before, or rather, long before the election campaign starts, right? Right. Because what happens many times is, especially with these politicians that are the corporate politicians, they have a political record. And so just before major elections, they start to change their image based on the polling, based on what they feel will get them elected.
So they polish the image as much as they can.
Not only polish it, but sometimes they reinvent themselves for the election. And so, you know, when you talk about Capriles, this is a guy who studied at the Universidad Católica Andrés Bello, which is a very conservative Catholic university in Venezuela. This is where he studied. And then he becomes the private secretary to Rafael Caldera, who used to be president of Venezuela, right? And then he becomes the president of the Chamber of Deputies, or what we would call the Congress. Correct. It's kind of like the Speaker of the Congress.
Okay.
And so throughout his trajectory, he was a very conservative person. He was part of the Christian social movement. And in the Dominican Republic, the Christian social movement was the party of Balaguer, who used to be the right-hand man to the dictator Trujillo. So these Christian social movements around the world, they're very conservative socially and in terms of social justice.
Is this an international component?
Well, the international components of the Christian social movement is always tied to the U.S.
Okay.
So, you know, moving along as Capriles becomes the mayor of one of the municipalities around Caracas, he brings the FBI in to train his police. So he's directly dealing with the Federal Bureau of Investigation from the United States when he's a mayor in a section of Caracas to train his police force. So you bring the FBI in there. When he becomes governor, he brings the Mossad, which is the Israeli security forces, to train his state police. So this is, and he made that contact with the Mossad in 2008. So it's not something, let's say, we could say, okay, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, Capriles was a right-wing conservative. But now, Capriles is great. You can't say that because up until recently, he's been getting money from U.S. aid, right?
USAID or?
USAID.
USAID.
USAID, right? And, you know, so
and for most people that are not quite sure, USAID is always a front for the CIA.
Exactly. So this is an ongoing, current, right, relationship between Capriles and forces who want to undermine democracy in Venezuela, forces who want to undermine social justice in Venezuela. And now he's painting himself as a center-left candidate, and he says, you know what? Lula da Silva in Brazil is my role model. So what does Lula say? Cut it out. I support Chavez. Right? I mean, really. You know, so this is the kind of games that Capriles is playing. He's not saying we're going to do away with what Chavez has done. He's saying, well, we're going to study it, we're going to analyze it, but he's trying to portray himself as an efficient Chavez. Okay? If you elect me, I'm not going to do away with all these wonderful programs for the poor. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to make them better. I'm going to make them more efficient. So, you know, is this right-wing person who all his life has worked within the right wing. His mom's family and his dad's family, two of the most powerful families in Venezuela. Her family controls cinema and theater. His dad's family controls communication and food production, right? So this is a guy who is born and raised in conservative circles.
What was his role in the, did he play a role or a definitive role in the attempted coup, in 2002?
For anybody who wants to look it up, it's on Venezuelan TV.
It is?
Yes. As the mayor of this, this part of Caracas, because it's broken up into different municipalities, right? He takes his police forces, they surround the Cuban embassy, they cut off the lights, they cut off the water, they put ladders up on the wall, they scale the wall, they go into the compound, and they go to the Cuban ambassador and threaten him. And they say, if you don't give us people from the Chavez government who are here reaching or trying to reach asylum, we're going to destroy this place. We're going to shut down this place. We're going to attack you. So this is Capriles. And so this is on Venezuelan national television. This is not something that's made up.
Actually, I saw the group that did that.
Okay.
I didn't know Capriles at the time, so I saw the event. And eventually what they did do was that they cut off electricity, which was a complete violation.
Right.
Because again, an embassy in the country has a certain autonomy and should be respected.
Right.
They cut off water and they cut off electricity for the Cubans.
Right.
And threatened them and kept trying to go over the wall.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
Right.
So, and he was part of that.
He was part of that. He climbed the wall. He got on a ladder and went over that wall.
He climbed the wall.
It's on Venezuelan TV. It's recorded. Okay? And so, you know, Capriles is part of this right-wing grouping, just like Romney, Mitt Romney, that they change themselves. They remake themselves depending on their audience. Right?
Where would you put Obama?
Oh, Obama is, well, if you have Capriles and Chavez, Obama is not Chavez. There's no comparison there. Obama is, I would say, left of Romney.
He's left of Romney.
Left of Capriles.
I think that's it. No, left of Romney is good.
Yeah.
He's slightly left of Romney.
See, but turning to the U.S. elections, the role of the Democratic Party and the Republican parties historically, and sometimes they flip roles, is for one to be more ideologically right and for the other one to be more open-tent.
Exactly.
See, so they play this game. But exactly.
That's great.
But in the meantime, the capitalists, the ruling class, corporate America, they remain in power because
they're the winners.
They're the winners.
Constantly,
because everybody's always playing the lesser of two evils.
That's correct.
And you wind up with evil in the end anyway.
That's correct. We agree on that. And we've agreed. The point that you've made sort of gives Capriles a whole different cap.
Right.
If you want to, if we want to use that.
Yeah.
So let's move into Chavez. Let's discuss Chavez because we pushed that out of the way. Give us a good idea, if you want, a synopsis of the phenomenon that Chavez has represented in Latin America. To start with.
Well, you know, Chavez is not an anomaly. He's not. In Peru, there was a military dictator who was a populist. He was for the people. So for Chavez to come from the military and say, I'm for the people is not anything new. In Dominican Republic, Francisco Camaño, you know, he was part of the constitutionalists who wanted to restore Bosch to power. He was a military man.
Correct.
So in Latin America, it's not unheard of. Now, what Chavez is doing is that he's proposing a 21st century socialism under the banner of the Bolivarian Revolution, which is different. I mean, Camaño didn't really get close to socialism until, you know, he visits Cuba, you know. But this is what, you know, Chavez is saying, that through elections, through the democratic process, even though he was involved in a coup at one point, we're going to introduce socialism. Now, after it failed with Allende in Chile, nobody, again, really thought you could introduce socialism into a country through elections. But now you have Evo Morales, and he's with the Movimiento de Acción Socialista, the Socialist Action Movement in Bolivia. You have the Brazilian Workers' Party in Brazil. You have Chavez, you know, with the United Venezuelan Socialist Party. And so, you know, it gives us hope that, you know, and we're rooting for Chavez, you know. Chavez has introduced a level of democracy in Venezuela that's beyond what we have in this country. You know, in this country, in order to elect a president, you have to let the Electoral College do it, right?
That's good.
And the Electoral College has no obligation to vote the way the popular vote is conducted. They have no obligation.
Well, the popular vote is secondary.
It's secondary.
It's irrelevant as well.
And it was set up that way because the founders of this country didn't trust the people and try to take back power away from the people because, you know, there have been at least two major types of governments here. The Articles of Confederation, in which the people and the localities had more power, and then the government we have now, which introduced a lot more power in Washington, D.C. And so this whole idea of electoral college was established so that if the people picked someone who was really for the people, then the elites could erase that election.
Correct.
So in terms of what Chavez has done in terms of democracy in Venezuela, They had one of the most transparent electoral systems. The Jimmy Carter Center was there.
Jimmy Carter stated as much,
right.
as a matter of fact.
I mean,
he said as much. He said exactly what you said.
Yep.
He said that the elections in Venezuela are fair,
yeah.
and they are much better prepared.
Yeah.
The transparency is enormous.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, we don't have to go too far.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had 2 elections in this country,
Yeah.
in 2000 and
Right.
2004.
Yeah.
That's been a farce.
A
And the guy
farce.
that lost became president.
That's
and
right.
He's president twice.
Twice.
8
Twice.
years.
Yeah.
He bankrupts the country.
Yeah.
And then continues on. So that's a little bit crazy, but
I mean, even on a local level, if you look at the Venezuelan election commission, all the parties are there. The party that's in power and all the opposition parties are there to monitor, to see. They do audits of the electoral process.
I saw it myself.
And if you go in New York City to get a party on the ballot, I mean, the Freedom Party tried to get on there. And then they wind up invalidating like 10,000 votes for them. And if, in New York City, the Democrats and Republicans control the Board of Elections. There are no other parties are involved in that process.
That's correct.
So in terms of democracy, you know, Chavez is, I mean, he's doing things far above and beyond what we're doing here.
Right.
In terms of poverty, poverty rates have gone down over 20% during his presidency. In terms of crime, now this is one of the areas, let's look at it. A lot of people internationally in the U.S. media, they criticize Venezuela for crime, right? But the U.S. is the country with the most crime in the world. Venezuela is 30th, while the U.S. is #1. The prison rates in the United States are 716 people per 100,000, right?
That's correct. It is the highest in the world.
It's the highest in the world. In Venezuela, it's 71. So when the media here...
Per 100,000 again.
Per 100,000, exactly.
Right.
So we're not talking about absolute numbers, but ratios in terms of the number of people. And so when the media here criticizes Venezuela for a high crime rate, they're being hypocritical. Because the U.S. has a worse crime rate and a worse prison rate than Venezuela.
Well, we need to sort of put an emphasis on this particular point. The U.S. has a drug war that is really a war on the population,
right.
and specifically on the black population,
exactly.
on black males.
That's right.
So therefore, the fact that we're seeing the prison system, the industrial prison complex, it is there to move people, to create this sort of slave enclave, and to compete.
Right.
And to compete with workers, and most people don't understand that, they're competing with workers that are outside because they've become workers at slavery.
Right.
So that is a very important. So therefore, the imprisonment is a very well orchestrated and calculated plan to keep black people, and that has not changed. That will not change under Barack Obama. Right.
Now, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, the amendment that did away with slavery, it says slavery is illegal in the U.S. except in prison. It says it in the Constitution. So, I mean, this is something that I teach in middle school because, you know, everybody feels, oh, Lincoln freed the slaves. There's no slavery in the U.S., right?
That's right?
But in the Constitution, if you look at it, prison is illegal except in prison. And so you have this whole prison industrial complex. And it looks at people, in particular African-American males, but also to a large extent Latino males.
To Latino as well, yes.
As, you know, labor. It's free labor. You can pay or not pay anything. I mean, if you see chain gangs in parts of the United States, they're out fixing roads. What are they doing? That's slave labor.
Slave labor.
That's slave labor.
And competing with people that should be getting these jobs.
Exactly.
But let's move. Give us an idea in terms of some of the accomplishment that he's done with ALBA, and he's been very much, and also CELAC, which is the new construction to bring in not only Latin American countries, but also the Caribbean countries into it.
Well, let me just give you 2 examples of how far-reaching this Bolivarian revolution is. When there was a coup in Honduras, Chavez immediately traveled to the region. And he tried to shame the U.S. into reversing the coup. Of course, that didn't happen. And so, you know, he tried to mobilize a coalition of Latin American countries, and he did, in support of Zelaya in Honduras.
Right. That's right.
And this is something that the U.S. not only was willing to support and did support the coup in Venezuela in 2002, but supported the coup in Honduras. And so you look at what has been the U.S. attitude towards Latin America, and you look at what has been the Bolivarian Revolution attitude towards Latin America, and you have to support the Bolivarian Revolution in that case. In terms of including other countries, something like oil. In Dominican Republic, it's an oil importing nation. And so what Chavez and the people of Venezuela have been able to do is to sell to developing nations oil at below market rates. Now, of course, the Fernandez government in Dominican Republic was so corrupt that then it resold it to its people at above market rate. So, you know, the Chavez and the Minister of Finance had to go to Dominican Republic and say, what's going on here? Why are we selling you oil at below market rates, and then you're selling it to the Dominican people at above market rates? So, but this is part of the Bolivarian Revolution. It puts people before profits, okay? People before profits in Honduras against the coup, people before profits in Dominican Republic in terms of oil and economic development.
In Haiti as well.
And in Haiti as well.
And in Haiti as well.
So, you know, when you compare the U.S. foreign policy in Latin America and the Caribbean,
there's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
It's a criminal historical perspective.
That's right.
They have not gone past that, and they're just pigeonholed. They don't know exactly what to do now, and so therefore they've backed off a little bit. Brazil has really stepped up, and so they try to just meander themselves around there. Yeah. But one of the things that I think Mariana raised, she raised the issue of which is what you just mentioned. I want to go back to it, which is the question of security, and she feels that that's something that's happening not only in Venezuela, it's also happening in Argentina and probably in other places in Latin America, where people on the street are almost afraid to communicate with each other.
Well, let me tell you, when my family travels to the Dominican Republic, they always tell me, when I get there, they always tell me, don't tell people where you're going to be and when you, right? At what time you're going to get there.
Right.
Just show up. Why is that? Why? Because throughout the world, there's an increasing rise in crime as people get frustrated with capitalism, neoliberalism. And one of the things that we got to understand, and one of the criticisms that some of the people on the left have of Chavez, is that in trying to introduce socialism through an electoral process, is that you have vestiges of all these elites throughout the bureaucracy, throughout the court system. And so, for example, when Capriles violated international law and Venezuelan law by assaulting the Cuban embassy, the Attorney General of that area tried to have him indicted and arrested. And what happened to the Attorney General? His car was car bombed. So he goes into his car, he turns it on, and it blows up. And so what do the judges?
Was he killed?
He was killed.
He was killed.
He was killed. There was a car bomb when he went into his vehicle and blew up and killed him. He was prosecuting Capriles for this, right? So then what happens after he's killed? The judges, they exonerate Capriles.
Wow.
And they dismiss his case. So this is one of the reasons that some people on the left criticize revolution through electoral process, is that you have the judicial system full of elites, right, who are going to exonerate these terrorists who are in Venezuela. And you also have many of the police officers who were part of the previous scheme of things, let me put it that way.
Well, yeah.
And so they'll turn a blind eye to crime because they're saying, well, you know, they have an ideology and a thinking that's not about socialism, not even about the people.
Yeah, but Mark, he's been in office since '98.
Well,
where this is 14 years.
Right.
He's got to be able to, even through these democratic practices, or when we say democratic, within the limits of the societal transformation, he's able to make certain changes. We've seen in Ecuador, where Correa had a situation in which he was almost taken out in a coup. It was being done by the police.
Right.
And where were these police officers getting their monies? From the State Department.
Right.
So in fact, what did he do? He took them out, and I mean, not killing them, of course.
Right.
Took them out, chased them, and replaced them, and has put new people. Chavez has been there for 14 years.
Right.
If you can't manage this, how will you manage the social, economical situations? That to me is the
well, I
big
mean,
fact.
the thing is that under the Bolivarian Revolution, it's a very humane system. I have to say that. Because I've never seen so many enemies of the state walking around and doing the type of things that they've been doing in Venezuela. Well, in Venezuela, that's how they express their humaneness, is that in other countries, if you had a revolution with arms, a lot of those people would have been put up against the wall and shot. In Cuba, many people were put up against the wall and shot. They were denounced by the people, and they were executed.
Well, in the 1960s, you can do that. It's a little bit hard to do that now.
Well,
I'm not saying it's something that
no, but this is the point.
Can't happen or won't happen.
This is the point, though. I'm not saying that you cannot have a revolution through the electoral process. But what I'm saying is that when you have a revolution through the electoral process, it's a very uneven thing. And one of the things that Chavez is going through now, it's a period of self-criticism. And it's not just Chavez, but it's the whole party. And he's asking everybody who's in the United Venezuelan Socialist Party to go through this process. And it's a very fundamental process for all socialists. We have to be able to criticize ourselves and see where our shortcomings are. And he's recognizing where his shortcomings are because he won by 11 percentage points. I mean, much less than he won previously. I mean, in this country, that would have been a landslide.
From 26 to 11.
If you look at the popular vote in this country, Obama beat Romney by like 400,000 votes, right? So each of them got like 51 million votes. I mean, what percentage is that? It's
pretty close.
It's extremely close.
Exactly.
But in Venezuela, he won by 11 percentage points, but it shows that he has to deal with this corruption. He has to deal with this perception, at least, that crime is very high in Venezuela. And I think that he and the core people of the United Venezuelan Socialist Party are up to the task. I think they're up to the task.
I would beg to differ on that. I think, especially with the point that you just made, it's very hard.
Yes.
And you've made a number of points here that if we can illustrate them. Okay. The first point is not just the fact of this transformation through electoral processes, because 6 years is a good amount of years, but it cannot be done by the party. And I think that's one of the major failures. The population has to be engaged.
Right.
The party has to become, how does the party become the bridge that helps create an environment for the population to be to have a stronger position in this process? The state will not make that transformation. And we've seen that.
Right.
It's just a state problem. And generally speaking, what we've seen happen with Chavez also is the corruption. So to me, Mark, I think it's a serious problem when you have criminals walking around. If somebody is, as Capriles, as mentioned, is doing, is in a court case, and the judge there gets car bombed.
Right, the Attorney General.
The Attorney General
Right.
gets car bombed.
Yeah.
That to me is
Yeah.
it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Now you
I
can't
agree with
necessarily
that.
say it's him.
No, no,
But on the other hand,
Right.
that's a guy that you basically should not be running as a governor.
Right.
And then he's running
Right.
for president. So that's another problem. But let's move with one last thing, and then we can sort of talk about things in general. The point that you made in terms of socialism, to me, is, again, it says volume about these things. Because I have to go back to the same point I just made, because in essence, who builds socialism? Is it being built inside? Is it being built outside? How much has he helped the cooperatives? And how much has he been able to transfer and to create a means of production that is populist base, as opposed to a privatized base? Because he's got to be able to create that, because that's one of the things that he would have been able to do, is to at least begin to create this enclave where workers have their ability to own or to manage their own shop, to manage their own industries for that matter, as opposed to having the private entity to keep, because as long as you have the major sectors of the population being controlled by private sector, you're not going to have that transformation.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, one area in particular, I just want to, we're going to get back to that, but one area is communications. Everybody complains about, state-run media and how it, promotes Chavez and the party there. But state-run media is about 5% of media in Venezuela. Okay, 95% of media in Venezuela is in private hands. And in the manufacturing, when the elites want to go on strike, they slow down production. So manufacturing has been increasing in Venezuela, but with government subsidies, with government support. And so, you know, in terms of controlling different sectors of the economy, the Chavez government has been trying to not confiscate private property, but trying to create alternative models of production, food production, manufacturing. And so it's kind of like you're creating a larger public sector without confiscating the property of the rich. And it creates a lot of tension, and it's very difficult. I mean, you know, in terms of our organization, People Power Movement, we believe that the path to make change is in the workers' councils that Chavez has tried to establish, is in the missions that he's tried to establish. And so we believe that change comes from the people. You know, our group is not a socialist organization, but we do believe in people power. And so in terms of what Chavez is doing in Venezuela and trying to promote his socialism, unless it has people power behind it, it's not going anywhere. And so Chavez, as a military man, comes in with this kind of, you know, leadership model that does not produce socialism. But from what we've seen of what he's done in terms of improving health, life expectancy, infant mortality rates going down, we believe that if he continues in this process of self-criticism, and if the party there continues in this process of self-criticism, that they will expand the workers' councils and the community councils. We still have hope that that can happen. We still have hope that that can happen.
While you're doing the self-criticism, is the population engaging and having its own criticism?
Well, let me tell you, when the population voted, that was their criticism. Well, no. when they voted, and it was over 80% voter turnout, when they voted to give Capriles 44%, that was a big criticism of, you know, what they feel that the current government there is lacking, you know, and we applaud that. You know, I mean, there's one thing that makes you better is people pulling your coat. That's and correct. People telling you that's the wrong way to go. Now, if Chavez and the party there, the Socialist Party there, doesn't listen to the people, then they're going to lose because, you know, they have elections coming up in December. Right. And these are governor elections. That's correct. So you won't have the figure.
Capriles is also involved in those elections?
Of course. Right. So you don't have the figure of Chavez that people, well, you know, he's done a lot for me. I don't want to let go of him. Now you got these other officials who people might not necessarily feel are efficient or are doing the best for the people. So, you know, we still have hope in the Bolivarian Revolution. We have a lot of hope in the Bolivarian Revolution. And we feel that if they're going to do this self-criticism, and that if they make the changes they need to make, and if they give real power to these workers' councils and these community councils, the people will be more involved, and the people will be the ones to make the most change in that country. That's the position that we come from. So we don't have uncritical support of Chavez. That's, you know, right. We don't do that. That's not something we do. But we still have hope in the Bolivarian Revolution.
I would agree. And I think it's important to mention also that it takes years and years to sort of combat what has been centuries of enslavement, centuries of disarming population all over the place. I mean, I couldn't amplify that more in terms of what Haitians have to go through, because the large population of Haiti has been, as much as it has this instinct to respond, but it's been knocked down. It's been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So those are the things. Well, give us closing. I think we covered a good amount of stuff. Yeah. I think the process for me is I'm a little bit more critical in terms of what I'm seeing, but I do appreciate the initiative that Chavez has taken, not only in the country nationally, but primarily in the region sector, because he has helped cement a sort of a unity that is really given, you know, Latin America this kind of sort of this area where people, democracies, and the movement towards the right, in the correct direction, the right direction in that sense. Because the point that I wanted to make when you said, you know, the people have done this and so on and so forth, it's always important to notice direction. Because direction really dictates where you're going. Right. Are you on the rise, or are you Are you flatlining?
Right.
Or are you heading south? Or are you heading down? You know, so those are the
It's
questions.
important. It's important.
Those are very important because he's been on the rise for a long time, and what's happened here, it's an indication that there's a bit of a slowdown.
Right.
So he needs to not just he.
Right.
And this is the
It's
whole
the
thing.
party.
It's the party.
And the people.
And the population. Yes. How do you create an environment
Right.
to help the population move forward and establish itself much more physically in different sectors of the economy and also socially, culturally. So those are the things. So I don't know what you'd like to sort of leave us with, or if you want to make a comment also on the U.S. elections, and we're good to go.
Well, I think that, again, we're very hopeful of the process in Venezuela, but it's critical. I mean, if Chavez does not have a process where these community councils and workers' councils have more power, where the power of these councils can override the power of these corrupt, petty bureaucrats, then the revolution there is going to be undone. Well, the people really have to really get involved and be the driving force. And Chavez is a good steward, right? He's a good oarsman, right? He can steer the ship in the right direction. But it's got to be the people really that push the fundamental change in Venezuela. And I think in terms of the elections here in the United States, what we would like to see is a real third party. A real third party, a people's party, okay, that can attack the issues of racism, attack the issues of economic inequality, attack the issues of gender inequality, and really make this a country for everyone, regardless of where they're from, but really from the voices of poor and working people in this country. I mean, for too long, these two parties have said that they're chasing the middle class, right, as it dwindles.
That's right.
The more they chase the middle class, the smaller it gets. And so we're not coming from that position. We're saying we represent the poor and working people in this country. And they need to have power because we are the majority. And we need to have a third party that can really organize and organize people, teach them. Let's go back to organizing 101, right? Let's do the political education. Let's do the organizing at the school, at the job, in the neighborhood, like we used to do. There's nothing new to this country. You know, we had a tremendous movement here. We've had tremendous movements at different periods of time, and we need to go back to that. We have to stop depending on corporate-owned parties, okay? Before Obama got elected the first time, he came down to Wall Street and had a meeting with them, and he left with untold millions of dollars, and then he got elected, right? So, you know, and then he brought in Geithner and Warren Buffett and all these corporate people, you know, and so it's the same gang in charge.
Exactly.
And so we like to see an independent People's Party form, and whatever's left of the middle class, their interest is also with poor and working people, not with the corporate elites who are destroying the middle class. And so that's what we would like to see in this country. And you know, right now with this Hurricane Sandy, these elites like Bloomberg, they usually take the opportunity when natural disasters occur to recreate human disasters, human-made disasters. You saw what happened in New Orleans. Right. They destroyed public housing. They actually demolished it, okay? And they dispersed the black population of New Orleans, where now the majority population is white. Okay, and in charge. And so they're not going to reconstruct the areas where black people live. And so we don't want that kind of thing happening up and down the East Coast, because we've already seen what happens with gentrification. Harlem, many people are leaving Harlem as economic refugees, moving to the Bronx, because they can no longer afford the rent and the food and clothing in Harlem. So now they're all moving to the Bronx. And we want that process to stop. Detroit has been destroyed, has been shrunken down. Blacks have been dispersed. Washington, D.C., a similar phenomenon is going on. And, so we want that to stop. Washington Heights is being gentrified. Many Dominicans are now moving to the West Bronx. In fact, they're being enticed, right, through Section 8 programs. Oh, if you move to the West Bronx, you can use a Section 8 voucher, right? So we're looking at all of this, and just at the time when African Americans, Latinos, are the majority in the cities, and we could exercise some real power to change education, to change housing. They're dispersing us now with gentrification. And now with this storm, we have to be vigilant so that this gentrification process that's going to disperse us doesn't accelerate. So we have to be very vigilant. And so, this Friday, and, I think Luis knows about it, and I hope you come. Right. Not Friday, Sunday. We're going to have a political discussion on natural disasters and these political agendas and what's going on in New York City. Many of us helped with the relief effort. We had a pedal power caravan where there was a shortage of gas. Sure. So we couldn't get cars to take relief supplies. So we did it on bicycles.
Wow, yeah. Luis took part in that.
That's it. Yes. And then, when we found some gas, we drove out to Coney Island because the trains weren't going out there. And so what we're seeing is that the poor who live in public housing, there's disparate levels of repair. In Coney Island, the areas that are mostly in the public housing, that is mostly Russian Jews, they have heat, they have light, they have elevators, and they live closer to the water. In the areas that are primarily African American Latino, some buildings don't have light, some buildings don't have heat, and they're farther away from the water.
Right.
So we're already seeing...
Well, Staten Island has gotten hit quite big, in a big way.
Right.
The Rockaways, Breezy Point, so those are predominantly white areas. Right. They've gotten the blunt of it.
No, but that's the natural disaster.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is the man-made aspects of the disaster.
As it continues.
Okay. Because the recovery is part of that process.
Mark, why don't you tell people where they can contact people that are in the internet, Facebook, where they can come in and join or take part in some of the meetings that People Power Movement undertakes on a regular basis.
Very good. Our group is the People Power Movement, El Movimiento Poder Popular, and you can reach us via email at peoplepower@live.com. That's peoplepower@live.com, or you can call us at 646-696-8485, 646-696-8485, or visit us on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.